Fellas, there's too much information and there's not enough telling it like it is when it comes to bicep training. If it's your first time watching, my name is Bald Omni-Man and I'm the creator of the Berserk Method, which is the best free self-coaching method on the planet, regardless of what your goals are for getting bigger and stronger. And what I mean is people that are in the trenches telling you what they think based on their experience are always going to give you better advice than people who can only report things that they heard work well, that they don't actually know work well, either in themselves or in others. I say all that to say that Dom, who's a community OG, a mutant tier competitive bodybuilder, asked me on my Instagram story a few weeks ago what my favorite curls were, the rep ranges, and how I like to do them. And it got me thinking, I have a lot to talk about because there are two that I can think of definitely, the reverse curl and the hammer curl, that I use for a variety of reasons that have a cascading effect. Just benefits not only on my presses, my pulls, my shoulder health, longevity, filling in volume. I basically want to give a full breakdown along with a form tutorial because unfortunately these two exercises, the reverse curl and the hammer curl, are written off as spider physique powerlifter cope exercises because they're just done ineffectively a lot of the time. Now, to answer Dom's question, I like reverse curls, reps of 12 or higher. It just feels better that way. And then for the hammer curls, reps of 5 to 10, because again, that's just what I like and what I feel I connect with the most. There's a lot more to talk about other than just the reps and the sets. Before we start to talk about the programming and the form, it's just a point that I want to address. The good friend of the channel, Alex Leonidas, he brought up in a video that he made about the barbell curls. First and foremost, it's just the truth of the matter when it comes to size, like the size of your arms. Doesn't really matter what curl you do because they all do the same thing. It's all about picking one that you connect with well and that you can do often over time. In other words, it's the long-term progression, not necessarily the curl. Now, his weapon of choice for that heavy loaded bicep exercise to base all of your bicep training off of was the standing barbell curl. And for 99% of y'all, that's gonna be sufficient. If you wanted to do a preacher curl, that's probably even better. The reason being is that you can load a preacher curl pretty much just as heavy as a standing barbell curl. They're just more stable. It's more of a stretch, targeted stimulus to the biceps. And overall, I just think they're probably a little bit better. I think the standing barbell curl looks a million times cooler, so that's a reason why you would do it. But long-term progression is not, to me, the only thing that I look at when I do my bicep training and when I design my programs. Basically, a point that I want to add to the discussion before anything else is that it's the curls that we can do the most volume of long-term without beating the crap out of our tendons that really need to be a big prime feature in our programs more often than not. It's not to say don't do that heavy loaded curl. It's that you're not going to be able to do 20 sets of standing barbell curls or 20 sets of preacher curls. You're going to need to fill in with something else. And in my opinion, it should be something that, like we talked about, just works synergistically with the rest of your program and brings more benefits than just builds my biceps, because they all do that. Most people have really, really long bicep tendons relative to like a freak like Mr. Oliva. Now, if you have really short muscle bellies or long tendons, so if you can put like 2-3 fingers between your bicep and your elbow, when you fully supinate, which just means turning your wrist like this, it tends to stress that tendon more. Stress is a good thing, but we're talking about maximizing volume. And when you fully supinate, your tendon is longer. A longer tendon means a tendon that's taking more of the stress as opposed to a muscle. Now, with that being said, I train arms 3 times a week, and I achieve that by filling in volume with my hammer curls and with my reverse curls. So basically 1 time a week, I'll have that heavy loaded bicep exercise, whether that is a standing barbell curl, a preacher curl. These days, it's a heavy weighted chin up, which yes, is absolutely a heavy loaded bicep exercise. I have a sole separate video talking about why that is valid to have in that heavy loaded bicep slot on a program. The problem isn't that a heavy weighted chin up isn't a good bicep exercise or that there's anything wrong with it. It's just that it has to be done skillfully and with the right intent so that the back doesn't take over too much, and we have to temper our expectations as to what any singular exercise can do on its own. The theme of this video is just synergy.
Gosh, fellas, that was a close one. This is Omni-Man from the future. There's one heavy loaded curl that reigns supreme overall, the Meadows curl, created by the legendary John Meadows, rest in peace. It combines the benefits of the strict curl, the preacher curl, and the incline curl to become the ultimate biceps blaster. Fellas, all jokes aside, if you want me to make a video about the Meadows curl after this one, let me know in a comment down below, letting me know that you're interested, and I will definitely get to work on that after I'm done with this one. Alrighty, back to the video.
But anyway, I'll do that heavy loaded barbell curl or bicep exercise, and then I'll fill in the rest of that volume with either a reverse curl or a hammer curl. And then on those 2 other days, it'll just be variations of the hammer curl and the reverse curl together on the same day. Now, if you happen to be running a program or you have a split where you're only training your arms 2 times a week, just do 1 day heavy loaded supinated curl and just do the other day my curls, so the reverse curl and the hammer curl. Now, more than just it spares the tendons from that standpoint, there's another big reason why I feel like you should fill in with a lot of either neutral grip or reverse grip curls, and it's your brachialis. It's that meaty muscle between your tricep and your bicep. When people have it developed, it makes a big difference in the way that their arm looks, and overall, in my opinion, it's a really easy box to check. They also work your forearm muscles really well, and a big chunky brachialis can make a big arm look even more impressive, and take a smaller, more compact arm and make it more impressive for the same reason. And then even on non-bicep exercises, it's funny, you know, I like to have my little ways I talk about things, but for example, when you do dips, if that brachialis is built up and chunky, it's gonna just bulge like something off a gas station Johnson pill, bro. It's a really, really cool look. Now, I've heard some people argue that reverse curls and hammer curls don't hit the brachialis any more than any other curl. That hasn't really been my experience. Where I think this might come from is that people who do a lot of supinated curls and not do the reverse and neutral grip curls, if they have a developed brachialis, a lot of times they focus on a lot of rowing, which will work your brachialis a lot as well. Which actually, now that I think about it, before I started doing a lot of direct arm isolation and revamping the way that I train my arms in general, I didn't have biceps, I didn't really have triceps, but I did have a chunky brachialis, and that was as a result and the benefit of just doing a lot of rowing. Which, speaking of rowing, brachialis curls, reverse curls, hammer curls, they have really good carryover to rows and pull downs, which even if you train for mostly hypertrophy and not for strength, carryover and synergy is not something that you should just throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's something that you should capitalize on. It's an easy box to check. Just because you don't train for strength doesn't mean that you don't blend synergistically. This is something that I've always pushed back on when it comes to talking about things in the hypertrophy training space as someone that comes from more of a strength training background. I always say that strength training is bodybuilding training and vice versa. It's just about different goals that you set, depending upon if you power lift or if you play a sport. And it makes sense why they would carry over, right? Works your brachialis, the brachialis works on rows. Just the way that you grip it a lot of the time is similar to rows. You're either pronated, just like on a barbell row, or you're neutral, like on a dumbbell row or a machine row. It's gonna have more carryover because it's just more specific than a supinated curl, which will have its own effect in aiding in the strength of your rows and your pull downs. But again, the closer that we can get to mimicking those exact joint angles, the better. And for people that might be questioning, like, why would I do curls to boost my rows? That doesn't make sense. I'm just gonna row more. Let me give you something to think about. It's common sense to say that if you have like a lockout issue on bench, or you just want a stronger bench in general, that you would train your triceps directly. That's just common sense. The same thing applies, but in reverse, when it comes to a row. It's literally the exact same thing. The biceps or the triceps of rows. I know that sounds stupid, but it better make sense. Why wouldn't it make sense to treat pulls and biceps the same way? I rest my case. The third big reason why I like my style of curling, when it comes to presses and tricep isolation, I find that the hammer curl and reverse curl offer some marginal but very real benefits when it comes to the stability and the comfort of those presses, particularly in the bottom end range where your forearm starts to meet your bicep. And that's due to something that I call the crash pad effect. This is particularly important to pay attention to if you are someone that doesn't have really short bicep tendons. The more muscle you have on your bicep and your forearm, the more that crash pad is going to come into play. And the more stable that bottom end of your press is going to feel, both from just like adding reps perspective, but also from a perspective of taking stress off your tendons in your joints, because there's that crash pad there. It's a big reason why, you know, the big fat guys, they bench so much, is because they have that natural crash pad of fat tissue. And every centimeter taller that you can make your biceps and your forearms stick out, the more stability is going to be offered, and it can be a very marginal difference that makes a big difference over time when it comes to just not beating the shit out of your joints and your tendons. Now you can obviously do that with any curl, but I find again that when we bias the brachialis will push the bicep out a little bit, and it'll make that arm stick out just that much more, particularly when the arm is flexed. And in general, you have a curl that's working your forearms, and a stronger forearm is going to keep your wrist more stable in a press as well, which is also going to aid in stability. Again, marginal benefits that add up over time. It's not about Herculean things in a program sometimes. It's about something that can over time add up to something very substantial. Now you'll notice these benefits on bench, but you'll notice them a lot more if you're doing really deep dips.
Is rewarded.
Or you're doing cambered bar benching or incline benching, where your elbow angle is naturally going to be a lot more closed at the bottom because there's a lot more range of motion. And having that crash pad of muscle is ultimately going to make those end ranges feel not only a lot stronger, but again, a lot more stable, and it will add up over time. Now lastly, if you thought that your tricep extensions and your press downs are not going to benefit from the same crash pad effect, you're wrong. They do. Those two things benefit from my style of curling as well. Tricep extensions in particular are seen as something that is just going to wreck your elbows unilaterally across the board. There's no way to avoid it other than if you warm up. John Meadows, rest in peace, always talked about doing the press downs before the extensions to warm up your elbow. What I found is something that can help in addition to that is, again, having bigger arms, biceps, and bigger forearms, because it creates that same crash pad stability at the bottom, where instead of your joints and your tendons and the elbow taking the stress of the end range where your arm is most flexed, it's instead being distributed to the bicep as well. It's literally a crash pad. Now overall, from a building the bicep standpoint, obviously they check the box. From a carryover standpoint, they go crazy. But from this holistic style of looking at things, they also arguably offer even more benefits in my opinion. So really do consider adding a lot more of these to your program if you haven't already. Now that we understand why I like to include them in my programs and what a lot of the benefits are, I want you to know how to do them effectively. I have my way of doing them. We're gonna head to the gym and have a form tutorial. I'll see you there and we'll come back outside and finish up. Let's head to the gym.
All right, fellas, we have been transported to the gym. We're going to cover the hammer curl first, just because I feel like although the mistake is a lot simpler, this is one that I see at the gym a lot more often, and especially with weights that are honestly just way too heavy. The big mistake that I see is what I just demonstrated, curling backwards, and what that basically turns the hammer curl into is a standing dumbbell row. You want to avoid that. The easiest way to avoid this is to, at the beginning of your rep, make sure that you flex your tricep, and then when you initiate the rep, that you flex your shoulder forward, meaning you just raise your shoulder a little bit. That keeps things exactly where they need to be at, and you'll instantaneously feel how much harder that feels, one, but then two, how much more your arms have to work as a result of that. So try that out. Let me know what you think. The reverse curl is less common just because I feel like less people do them, but because you do this with a barbell typically, you have a big propensity to power clean the bar up. So you hump the bar, you use the powerful muscles in your hips to initiate tension instead of your arms basically. So similar solution. We're gonna flex the shoulder forward, let the biceps sit on our lats, and then we're gonna curl to a slightly higher touch point than what you're probably used to. A lot of people curl to about the nipple. I always say curl to the throat, the chin, or the forehead, whatever's comfortable for you. And then, just like with the hammer curl, we're gonna flex our tricep at the bottom, just to make sure that our biceps and our arm muscles are getting fully stretched. And that's all she wrote, fellas. It's really simple cues, you just gotta pay attention to what you're doing. I'll see you guys back outside for the rest of the programming.
All right, we are back outside. Now, two things to just keep in mind to break it down Barney style. After you watch that form tutorial, I hope that the differences in the way that you can do those movements is just apparent, but two things to keep in mind, two cues. Flex your tricep and flex your shoulder a little bit. That'll keep the weight in a good position to where you're actually working the muscles and you're not cheating yourself out of the stimulus. Now, how do I like to program them specifically? I talked about the rep ranges and how I like to put them after a heavy loaded curl, which in general we'll recap. I like to put them after a heavily loaded supinated curl or together with one another on a separate day. They're basically volume fillers to make sure that our biceps grow the most that they can on our program for the given amount of time during the week that we have to train, basically. In terms of the actual workouts that I like to do these days, the past, I'd say 6 months or so, I've been really loving drop sets for hammer curls. So basically what that means is I'll start off with like a normal set to failure in the 5 to 10 rep range. Then I'll drop down to, say if we started with the 55s, do a set to failure, then do the 50s, the 45s, the 40s, the 35s, the 30s, the 25s, and I'll usually stop about there. I progress with the usual common sense. You do more reps, then you improve the quality of the reps, then you improve maybe like the amount of time it takes to do those reps, and then lastly you add weight in that order. For the lighter drop sets where I drop down to 50, 45, it's the same thing. It's common sense, again, double progression, triple progression, dynamic double progression. However you want to splice it out, it's just simple stuff. Now, drop sets are something that I want to talk about a little bit because I feel like they're misunderstood and maybe again a bit disrespected. I'm guessing because you can't get super strong by doing them, but here's the thing. Again, synergy. We have that heavily loaded curl in our program already. There's no reason to attack that same physical quality again. So where drop sets might not be a good idea to do on their own because we still need to make sure that we have a good strength adaptation, they can be really good in conjunction with something else that does that. Drop sets are just a good way of getting in more work in less time, getting a good pump, and overall getting good hypertrophy stimulus without having to load up a bunch of heavy weight. And again, while it's true that they don't build a lot of strength on their own, synergy allows us to incorporate things in our program that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to because we are making sure that we check our boxes in other places. Keep that one in mind. Synergy is important. Now, of course, like I said, I like to work in the 5 to 10 rep range. For reverse curls, I like using what's called rest pauses. Call it cluster sets, whatever the case may be. Basically, you just do a given number of reps, you have a target rep range, and you just rest in the middle of your set for maybe a second or two. Do a couple more reps until you reach the top of that rep range. I first got the idea from this, of course, from the super squats program, where you would take your 10 to 12 rep max that you could do like unbroken with no rest pauses, and you just add in rest pauses every rep or after your 10th rep, depending upon how you want to do it, and you just don't rack the bar until you get 20 basically. So being that my target rep range is anywhere from 12 upwards, I may do like 8 unbroken reps or 10 unbroken reps, which just basically means like non-stop, I'm just going. Then I'll rest after the 10th one for maybe a second or two without dropping the weight basically. Then I'll do like another couple reps, rest a couple more seconds, and so on and so forth, until I get to the top of the rep range that I want to work at today. So if I want to do 15 reps with like 80 pounds, I'm going to rest pause until I get to 15 reps. Now, the way that I progress on this is a little bit different than the drop sets that we just mentioned before. I'm basically just repeating the same weights in rep range until I can max out that rep range without doing a rest pause. Does that make sense? So for example, if on week 1 I do 10 unbroken reps and then I rest pause my way up to 15, I'm going to keep attacking that weight in rep range until I can do 15 reps with no rest pauses. You can grow for a really long time with the same weight in the same rep range, training exactly like this with this movement, and that's why I really like it. It's uncomplicated, it lets you work hard, and it's just fun. These 2 intensity techniques that I add to these curls are just a way of adding novelty to our program in a way that also benefits us, again, synergistically. These rest pauses and the curls aren't the best for getting stronger in of themselves, but again, like I said, we have that heavy loaded curl already. We don't need to ramrod the same thing twice. The name of the game with these 2 exercises is to fill a pragmatic or common sense role in our program, maximize bicep size, and again, add some fun and variety while just really being very fucking good exercises. Now, what are a couple variations that I like to throw in for variety for fun, since I'm talking about doing things that I actually like? I really like, for the neutral or hammer style grip curls, throwing in curls on a neutral bar, particularly one that has a camber in it if you can. I like using my Omni bar, but you can use a regular neutral grip bar if that's all you got. The reason why I really like using the neutral grip as a variation, neutral grip barbell as a variation, is because that instability causes your forearms to fire even harder. So you miss out on a little bit of the bicep and brachialis stimulation, but it really maxes the forearm stimulation, which I find, again, if we're talking about synergy, it just makes sense to include something like that in your program. You don't need to have any fancy curl bar. It could literally be the tricep bar at your gym. It'll offer the same benefits. I use my Omni bar and I call them Jodeci curls just because of the way that I do them. Real slow, methodical, don't rush, there's no reason, take your time. One that I've tried but I don't personally like as much is preacher hammer curls. It's not that they're not a good exercise, I personally just don't really like doing them. Now for the reverse curls, I personally haven't done a whole lot of variation. I just find that they work just well enough on their own, so I don't vary them too much. That's all she wrote, fellas. I got a question for you though. What's your favorite curls? Other than like your heavy loaded chin-ups and easy curl bar and things like that. What's your favorite curl to fill in volume with? And what's your favorite rep range to work with? If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good day.